So we're at this moment now, the third episode of Behind the Scenes, and I started reflecting genuinely as to when I bring it to this moment in Vancouver, where it's all about recovery in Module 4, I really have to ask myself, did I actually get the entire ODTN telecom crew to where they need to be? And this morning in a class, rather this afternoon in a class, a student really opened my eyes to something that I didn't reflect on. And it was this idea that I walked in there basically saying, how did this happen? And I got a lot of people on the defensive. If I framed my narrative a little bit as, um, how can we prevent this from happening again? Maybe I would have got faster, different, and more confident and polished answers. I don't know. But that's something for me to reflect on. And I couldn't think of anybody better to engage in this reflection than Alex himself, as he was my co chair there in Vancouver. Alex, my friend, how was that for a philosophical opening to episode 3 of Behind the Scenes?
Well, hindsight's 2020. And I posted this on LinkedIn about is like there are no perfect answers. There's just slightly less sucky answers. And when we're in the heat of battle, the fog of IR,
Yeah.
it's important to recognize that you can't expect that everything is going to go right. Um, Both there's a lot of unknowns, there's inconsistencies, there's absence of information, there's emotions, there's stresses. You pulled real stresses and emotions out of me in the first module that started triggering what I would say is like the less ideal responses, the responses that I think in retrospect I would have answered differently, but I answered because I was on the spot. And when we're dealing with incidents, we are on the spot. So and that's certainly why, and we're going to talk about module 5, is like that debrief is so critical to look back and try to understand what we could have done better to continuously improve.
Sticking with this whole thing of like really powerful moments and thinking, another student said this in class today and said something to the effect of, a half truth is more dangerous than a lie. And it really gets you to think that as the incident commander, as the person who's kind of going, I need answers, am I pushing people to say things that I want them to say, or the things that I need to hear so that I can plan, especially when it comes to recovery, long-term recovery, etc. So there's so much to unpack in all of this. But you know what? Without any further ado, I think I'm gonna cue the siberX team and say, team, thank you for everything that you do behind the scenes. You are the true MVPs. Really, me and Alex just talk about things, but you make the experience happen. CyberX team, if you can take us to 2 minutes and 55 seconds, because I think this is when Alex drops some pearls of wisdom, but also tells us what actually has gone down. Yeah, around about here,
where we need
let's
to
listen
be
in for the
to
next two
progress
minutes
into
or so.
recovery right away?
As the great Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Mm-hmm.
And ODTN Telecom experienced a pretty catastrophic outage by any stretch of the imagination. And it really did show where there are some gaps and failures in our process. Incident response is seldom linear. We have NIST 861 R2 to help us guide, but even in that framework, it is a circular diagram because it is quite circular. The SOC really appreciated having some guidance. They were running around taking direction from various members of the organization that was spreading themselves pretty thin, and they're hunters. They want to hunt, and they were not really getting the achievement satisfaction that they wanted. So once we were asked to really focus on attribution, trying to get down to root cause, they focused on that versus some of the containment and eradication activities. We were able to really focus and get some results. So we wanted to work backwards. We did have some indicators that the update server for our network backend had pushed a strange firmware. So we started looking at that update server. Unfortunately, those logs do not go into the SIM, but they were retained on the server. So we did get those logs, and we started looking that, yes, a firmware was uploaded. We worked with the vendor to validate that that is not their firmware. Versioning, checksums, nothing was aligned. So certainly something that we do not want in the environment. Unfortunately, it did get pushed across our environment.
Let's pause there.
We did identify.
Let's pause there, and this is the moment when you do say, Alex, we did identify this as an insider threat, and then you start going into, even though we had documented procedures, this still happened, and we went through all of these things. I gotta ask you, when we're talking about recovery, does all of this matter at this point? Isn't it more about, okay, we know what's happened, but let's just now plan on how are we going to come out of this? Do you think we spend a little too much time on this?
So yeah, NIST 861R2 is linear with a little bit of a loop back. And now that's usually to address the potential that you didn't contain everything or there was a reinfection, things like that. But we also have to recognize that it isn't just it generally isn't one stream. Depends on the size of the team, but there's usually parallel streams. And what I was discussing right there was that while the containment and eradication activities were going on, some of that would be the cyber team, but some of it wouldn't be. It would be network teams, server teams, et cetera. Then secondary streams, because at the end of the day, we do really want to make sure we understood what happened so that we can prevent it. We need to threat hunt to continually monitor and make sure the threat is gone. So I'm discussing like what revelations that we have come to that likely would be becoming more determined in the eradication and recovery phase. We certainly don't know what's going on generally unless it's ransomware on module 1. Module 2, we're again trying to fight the fire. But now once we get the fire out, then we can start trying to understand some of the root cause. Again, a bit of a distraction and not the primary topic of module 2, the recovery phase, or sorry, module 4, the recovery phase. But still, the business wants to know, us techies want to know, and likely the regulator's going to want to know too.
I agree. But I gotta be very transparent with you and tell you during this time I did, while we were on stage. And look, for those people that are watching, by the time you get to module 4, as hosts, I'm sure Alex can attest to this as well, your energy starts to dwindle. And yes, to some extent, you know that you're acting it out, you're doing a tabletop, but this could also happen in real life. And by this point, there's some questions, I may not want to get into. Alex, I have this because I still remember it. I was debating should I bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up now. The question was very direct and was WhatsApp to me during the event. And the person said, the CEO probably just wants you at this point to fire the third-party vendor. Why not just fire them and sue them and take them to court? And I think that is a knee-jerk reaction that could have happened. I think it would have been interesting if I actually threw that in, but in all honesty, I was freaking tired.
Well, that has happened. At least one airline is still trying to sue CrowdStrike for their mishap. But like, you sort of have to recognize that like the vendor was not the problem here. It was an illicit firmware brought in by an insider. So, a bit of a naive knee-jerk reaction at a minimum, but also recognize like a telecom uses technology and has relationships with those companies that are described in decades, if not centuries. You're not going to just be able to say, all right, until they go bankrupt like Nortel, but like telecoms and like say a company like what was Nortel, but now Avaya, that's a very long-term relationship. You're not getting out of that.
Yeah, and I agree, and that was one of the things I was debating. We bring this up. Sometimes to some it might seem obvious, to some less so, but I just felt that maybe at the time would have gone down a different role, so I didn't bring that up. But then that's when, in some shape or fashion, I think that sort of came up in about the and CyberX team. If you can take us to the 7th minute and 47 seconds, I think there was the media spotlight. I thought the timing of this media spotlight was very good. So let's just watch this, and then Alex, I'll come to you with the question that I got just now from somebody that's watching live.
This is Roshan Khan from CyberX News. The nationwide telecom disruption has left millions without service, affecting healthcare, finance, and emergency response systems. Businesses and essential services are scrambling for alternatives as communication blackouts disrupt daily life. ODTN telecom teams are working urgently to restore access to critical systems and infrastructure. But the scope of the disruption remains unclear. With no clear timeline for full recovery, concerns are mounting over long-term resilience and the effectiveness of existing security measures. As communications remain in the dark, the question remains, when will full services be restored? Stay with CyberX News
Yeah,
for
and
the
you know
latest
what? Round about
action.
this time, you can pause it here. Round about this time, Alex, I think Roshan even walked into the room because Young Defenders of the North was done. And this is the moment when you just want to throw a book at her and say, please stop telling me about concerns. We're figuring this out. You know what? I really think we did a good job of showing the audience, especially those who are experiencing for the first time, how the media can actually add to your trouble and woes when you're trying to deal with the situation. And honestly, you know what? Maybe Alex, you're the best person to talk about it. I think Marks and Spencer did it brilliantly when they released the ice cream sandwich to say, here, something else to talk about rather than the Marks and Spencer breach. What do you think, Alex?
Well, from the get-go, ODTN Telecom was not in control of the narrative. And again, that was an interesting angle that the media knew more. And certainly, it's not the first time an external source has known about a company's incident before the company has. Um, but if you look at going back to the a half truth is worse than a lie, with the news culture we have now is they need to get something out immediately, and they will say things that are half truths, misrepresentations, misunderstandings, because their business is a stream of stuff to its consumers. You and I included, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it would be very frustrating for a company to be dealing with a media source that seems to know more than they do. But now that we do have an understanding, the media still is going to be, playing on the viewers' heartstrings, or really wanting to talk about the impacts and putting pressure on, the big corporation impacting everyone. You have to recognize that telecom is a very unique business in the sense that its job is to provide a service that everyone expects to exist 24/7. And those businesses build their businesses off of that service. And, ambulance service, hospitals, etc. Some functions can't operate without that connectivity. So it does have a major impact, and the media is going to gravitate towards those sensational headlines. And again, you know what? As a consumer, we are also quite interested in learning about the things that we think never go away going
Mhm.
away, right? Like that's something that we really do care about. It impacts us maybe directly, can't go on Instagram right now, or indirectly that somebody that's in the hospital that their surgery was canceled or something like that.
Yeah, and you know what? I think what's really interesting is, and to those that are watching, is keep this in mind that the way the media game has been elevated now into Ottawa and then where are we first? Vancouver and then Calgary? No, Calgary, then Vancouver,
Calgary,
whatever it is. That ODTN.news function and the fake news and the disinformation and misinformation, I think is going to have a huge impact on how people understand what is going on. It's going to trigger, during the event, the plan is to consistently go back to ODTN news. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how people start piecing things together, what questions we get, and it really does impact. I got someone just send me a question, and thank you to a lot of my friends who are watching. And feel free to drop it on the YouTube chat or on LinkedIn Live instead of direct messaging me. But the question was, during these sort of scenarios, this is like a war room. Alex, is there usually for those folks who are on the table, is there a media and a social media blackout that they have to go through? Like they have to put their phones away and no engagement with the media? How is that managed? Because we were dealing with a situation where we were thinking, who the hell is leaking information? So is there a blackout during this period for everybody in the war room?
I think it's something worth considering depending on the business, and that you would have that in your incident response plan, that you would have protocols in place of personal devices not being allowed in.
Yeah.
Certainly that exists outside of incident response depending on the business. But I think where I've seen it mostly is just standardizing how to communicate during an
Hmm.
incident over social media. But needless to say, as we start looking at communication protocols, a business wants official channels only. They want to be trying to control the narrative, and it's not to manipulate like fact, but more so to make sure that the misinformation that we were seeing in this scenario isn't taking over the narrative. Because if you think about it, politicians are driven by what the news is saying, right? If
Yeah.
there's outrage on something, now you have a politician trying to put their thumb on the scale of a potential decision of how the business should recover, what should be prioritized first, and adding that complexity while you're dealing with so much other complexity in terms of like, no, we can't bring this client back online yet. We have to do this one first because somebody from upstairs is telling us to. Really distract from the mission.
Yeah, and I think this is the key thing, right? Is that these distractions and those noises, you really have to know how to balance it. And I firmly believe that, especially in this scenario, if it was actually articulating itself in real time, I see the value of saying an absolute social media lockdown. You don't have any outside access at this point for the period that you're in this scenario. I will say that some of these war rooms can get extreme to the point of where nobody's even allowed to leave, depending on the nature of what you're dealing with, right? So, if you really, really appreciate how intense these scenarios can be in the event that this in real time is a nation state attack hitting a national infrastructure in which this sort of is, yeah, there's a possibility that there's states of emergencies that are declared, and really things become very different than what you can imagine. So, yep, great points there, Alex. Alex, I really want to move to something that our friend to my right, Rares, who I've known for a very long time, he pointed out something interesting, and a question came in my mind at the time. I'm gonna ask that to you right now. So let's siberX team. Can we play from 13 minutes, 44 seconds ish to hear what Rares had to say?
Quite a bit of time to get here. So Rara is our industry expert here from Kaspersky.
Good, thanks. Yeah, so I would just like to start first saying that the previous modules, to your question, it is indeed feels like from what we spent a lot of unhealthy time trying to identify, put a threat attribution, jumping maybe too fast through what we thought we were going to do, eradication and recovery. Now we're talking about recovery. Suddenly, magically, we have a threat attribution in place. So yes, it's normal to feel that we're going fast, but this is what happens when you are able to respond fast. The mean time to detection to mean time to respond, the extra tools, so our technology stack clearly failed us big time, which escalated to a human level, having HR involved, pretty much people losing their intellect capabilities or things of that nature. So the idea is that indeed this is what is normal to experience when you are capable to have proper threat intelligence ingesting in your technology stack. So
Yeah, I think we can pause it over there. And Alex, I think this was that moment, right? That drama. But as much as it was drama of ODTN, I think Rares made a good point is you will always feel it's just human tendency to, while it's, yeah, let's recover from this, let's restore services safely. I think we just can't dodge the fact that it's human tendency that you want to know who the hell did this to us. You just want to. I don't think you can escape that.
Oh yeah. Um, yeah, I always tell this story that like I remember going into an incident response. I was the first on scene, and we're starting to lay out what the plan will be, and I realize like everything that they're telling me is driving towards the whodunit.
Yeah.
You know, it was so and so in the library with the candlestick, and I had, and this is a CISO, and I'm just this young buck techie, and I was like, does it matter? And generally, it like the whole point of incident response is not to solve the murder mystery, but to recover the business, bring the business back online.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
We do have such a desire to know who done it. It's why every time there's a tragedy or a catastrophe, we're glued to the 24-hour news cycle because we want more information. We want the context. We need certainty, and probably that relates a lot to our desire to manage the potential risk of that threat. So I need to know more about it so I can make a proper decision. But I really liked what he said is like we spent an unhealthy amount of time debating.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
And why that is super relevant is because we were going back and forth. Like we're at a cybersecurity tabletop exercise, so there's probably a cyber incident. But I was really driving home the fact that like, well, we don't have any evidence of this, and like we're listening to like this news article that it doesn't track. Like we don't have any other evidence, and our tools failed us in the scenario, right? And generally, it fails on the other side, and that's what I was pointing out. Either end of module 1 or module 2 was like, I'm not making this call because cybersecurity tools, unless tuned, cared for, and loved, produce a lot of false positives. And cybersecurity teams, raise the flag, get everyone out of bed, and then they look like the bad guy. And that happens, right? So, there is generally a hesitation of not being the chicken little in this situation. In this case, the inverse was true, is that our tools either had a lag or a defect that was not, or, in this case of Stuxnet, the malware actually was tricking the monitoring tools into reporting a nominal state, so that it did not create any reaction, and then when there were problems and they were checking their tools, like, well, we quickly cross that option off the list and move on, and we start pulling on different threads and go down way out in left field, further delaying our ability to understand the scope and start the process.
Yeah, and I think the way you put it out there, right, is we get a lot of false positives, and then you get a lot of alert fatigue as well. So I think the realities were coming out in terms of, okay, we're charting a path towards recovery, but we are still dealing with these situations where there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of finger pointing. And I think it started to get, that moment, I can't quite remember the timestamp. I'll just pull it up right now. CyberX team, if you can queue us up for about 16 minutes and 7 seconds. There's a bit of a debate between Richard and myself, and I just want to go to that. Yeah, around about there. Let's hear this moment.
We've not communicated enough. We've continually been chasing.
Just here for the next 2 minutes.
We should be seizing control of the narrative. Now that we have, with relatively high confidence, confirmation that we've been attacked by a state-sponsored actor or an affiliate of a state-sponsored group, We are also a victim here. And so this is my comms hat. We are just as much a victim as the people who rely on us. It is not our fault that a state-sponsored attacker took advantage of us. Certainly,
yeah, but let's pause here because those of you who can watch this online, please feel free to watch the whole thing. This is when I start to quote unquote lose my shit and go, "What do you mean this is not our fault?" Alex, tell me honestly, when Richard said this, I know there was a big narrative and people appreciated it, but that's a bold freaking statement. It's not our fault that we got hit. I felt a little uncomfortable with that statement. It's not personal or anything, but I thought it was a very, very bold statement. And I didn't react as much as I would have, let's say, if he made that statement in module one. But I thought it was very good. And I know he wrote his speech and he read it out, which was a lot of fun, added to the drama. Well done. I didn't think Richard would play the role with such theatrical effect, but he did. But that was a bold statement, Alex. It's not our fault. Your thoughts?
So I guess I've coined this term, the blue teamers existential crisis, that we believe if we have a little bit more money and a little bit more time, we can stop cyber threats. And I don't think, I know that that's not true. Well, we cannot stop all threats. Let's make it simple. Let's totally take out the technology piece of this, but have we stopped all threats of car crashes? Have we stopped all threats of plane crashes? No, we have not, and we will not. And I think where he was going with that is that even a telecom provider who should be, considering that they're providing services to critical services, they would have a need to provide a higher level of assurance to their customers on the services they're offering. We're not there is a limit of what they are willing to spend to prevent the 99% of threats. And a state-sponsored threat actor is a whole new ballgame. It is an army of sanctioned hackers that don't have to hide on IRC and be worried that one of their pals is an informant. They are working for the government. They are given unlimited resources, as well as unlimited information from various other intelligence agencies and whatnot. It's an army, right? And there's a reason why you'll see clauses in your insurance that insurance doesn't cover you if the damage is from an act of war. And it's because you're not insuring against war, you're insuring against edge cases and natural disasters and things like that. So I do think it's a cop-out to say well, it's not our fault. There's certainly potentially things that could have, security is a layering strategy. So did we have enough layers? Were they adequately configured properly? Did they all fail? Those are the things that we can have. But also the media wants to have a bad guy. I guess we all do, right? Library, Candlestick, but that's not necessarily what the business cares about. We don't need to have that bad guy. The bad guy could have been internal processes and incompetence, right? That's not a hacker. That's something intangible. But we do have the need for it, and we also have the need to not take blame. So Richard's saying, it's not our fault. I tend to agree. Probably isn't our fault if it was a state-sponsored attack, but it's also a little bit more complicated than that.
So one of the things we didn't get into, right, is and again, I don't think ODTN is fashioned to deal with this, but we talk a lot about recovery and we go into the depths of it. And there's one more timestamp I want to go to, and then we'll move to the lessons learned. And maybe I'm jumping between the two, but something crossed my mind, and I don't think I have punctuated this eloquently enough, but I'll still bring it up. The response to the attackers, we never got into that. And we don't even, as we're going into Ottawa, I don't think we get into do we need to respond to these attackers? Is that an area of discussion that should be brought up, even if it's a sidebar discussion? What do you think? I know it's a risky one to bring up, but I thought I'd share it.
First and foremost, most breaches that Canadian businesses are hit with, you'll never know. Unless they tell you, and it's a big ransomware splash on their screen. Attribution is not going to happen. Certainly, there is some businesses that do need attribution, but at the end of the day, like, what problem are you solving by knowing that it is an entity outside of your jurisdiction that does this for a living, right? Assuming maybe not state sponsored, but more cybercrime. So it doesn't matter. Like I guess a little bit on the TTPs to understand, like, okay, well, it was an X group and they really like using this tactic. Like, all right, maybe we need to improve our layering in that area.
Right.
But I still think that's a bit of a whack-a-mole problem because there's more areas that you need to add more layers to than you have money or time to do. So does it matter to solve the murder mystery and know who done it? No. In my mind, it's not. Knowing how it happened and how your systems let it happen is critical and really helps with improving the business's resiliency. But yeah, I don't. I think it's interesting. We all want to know about it, and that's why CrowdStrike, as an example, has has employed a graphic designer for the last several years building cool images to represent, to be a bit cliche, a bunch of people in a basement, right? But like, it is pretty hilarious.
You know what? I agree with you. And on that point of a bit hilarious, I'm going to ask the siberX team to kind of go and prepare for module 5 and, the closing module. And while we're moving into that, I encourage everyone to watch this session. It was, at some point, I did feel that, okay, Newman and Jillian, let's bring it down to some key action items. And I think the way Jillian wrapped the session up was phenomenal, where she sort of just said, these are the 4 or 5 things we need to do. But you'll see that ping pong happening a lot. Suddenly, Mary will come up and say, hey, have we confirmed that there's no privacy breach? Have we confirmed that no data has been leaked out? There's a lot of different things that you have to, and a lot of things come up to mind. And this is where that incident commander is so critical. But I also feel, especially in this session, Alex, if you watched it again, the way James from Immersive Labs and Rares from Kaspersky, I think they really amplified how an industry expert needs to speak at the table. What was very interesting was to see that they brought up their points but didn't come with a product focus. And I found that to be really, really healthy. Any tips that you would give to some of our sponsoring partners who are coming on as industry experts? Any tips that you would give them in terms of how best to position their product without talking product?
Yeah, that's a really good conversation. It's the conversation I have with a lot of sponsors, and sponsors are critical to these events happening. They keep 100%. It affordable for attendees, and arguably there's a bit of a problem in our industry that, like, conferences that are supposed to be about sharing knowledge sometimes don't do that very good, and it's really much more of a trade show. siberX has really developed something clever. Operation Defend the North is a very entertaining and exciting tabletop exercise to watch. Even on the 5th module, there wasn't an empty seat in that room. So that's well over 100 people are glued to this scenario. Part of the sponsorship for ODTN is that one of their subject matter experts gets to sit in and participate. And what we try to do is roll the scenario to, like, incorporate how their solution could work. Now, they want to beat their chest a bit on their solution and how great it is, but we also encourage that thought leadership. Jamie and all the other subject matter experts that are there were awesome. They attended a couple calls with us to get acquainted and go. We did a really great tabletop with them. But the other reason we like to have sponsors in there and classfully shimming in product placements is like, well, we want those visual aids because those are the tools that we use in incident response, and it really helps with making the experience immersive for our audience, which I think is really important. So, I think like, I what I'm really happy to say is I didn't feel any sponsor got up there and then just started being a salesperson in the middle of an incident. If they did mention their
that's the key
product,
caveat, in the middle of an incident. Well said.
yeah, like how inappropriate would that be in real life, right? And like, all these guys are professionals, guys and girls are professionals, so like there was no worry about that. But like, it is valuable to the sponsor and it's valuable to us to be able to have a little bit of narrative, like, hey, we pulled up this tool and this is the insights we were able to get, and it gives a visual, it really helps to the story. So I love that idea, and like all of our sponsor subject matter experts have been excellent, either being very graceful with how they mention their product, and sometimes not even, just really enjoying the moment, showing their thought leadership, because at the end of the day, like, hey, that guy was really smart. Who does he work for again? That's a good company. It works.
It works. It goes a long way. And I think the stories from the trenches sometimes are important. Those moments when you can go, we've seen this, without disclosing, of course. We've seen this happen a couple of times, and then this journey looks all too familiar. Stories are super, super important. And I cannot tell you how that sort of brings out the person behind the product, and that builds the relationships that you want, etc. And then allows you to really look at security as a team sport. So yeah, I agree with you, to CyberX team, the way they've put this all together. I mean, my job is just looking at the prompts and keeping the narrative going, but then the production side, getting them at the table, bringing the right thinkers, the right experiences to the table is an extremely daunting task. So yes, CyberX team, good on you. We have about 20-ish minutes left, and I want to go into the closing module. And firstly, again, I think Octavia was the perfect host for this module, where she's really able to sort of bring it back and say, "All right, kids, you've had all this time together. Now let's talk about what are we going to do so that this doesn't happen again." And she really drove that narrative home. But one of the things, like if I opened this session, I would have really started off, as I always tend to do, with a quote. And I would have said, the best time to fix the roof is when the sun is out. And there was someone in the audience who had a sticker on their laptop which said, what did it say? It said something to the effect of, think bad, do good. Now, depending on where your mind's at, you can read that in different ways. I don't want to analyze that, but I really felt that that was the ethos over here. You got to think about those worst case situations, even when things look quote unquote tabula rasa, clean, blank, no issues, and then do the right things, even when certain incidents are not happening. One of the questions, and we'll go to certain moments, which was shared with me after the event, and I want to bring that to you, Alex, is from a training and a preparation perspective for these kind of attacks, can we truly train our technical and response teams to deal with these incidents before they happen? Are tabletops truly sufficient enough? Your thoughts, Alex?
I guess where else would they get the experience, right?
Yeah.
And I worked in a SOC, right? So arguably, I was seeing a diverse array of incidents, misconfigurations, devices not coming back up, and dealing with the protocols of like, when something goes red on the board, what do you do? But not everyone gets to work in an operational environment like that. They're usually managing their own environment. To oversimplify it, it's one dimensional versus having 100 environments. The Christmas tree has a lot of blinky lights. So in my opinion, I think like tabletops are like the best bang for buck any organization can do, and at both levels. So at the technical level, it's building that muscle memory, building team collaboration and camaraderie, but also I see it as a value for an awareness piece. So it's practice for the technical and operational teams, but it's awareness for the executives and the boards. If you get those people in there, because cyber's confusing, and they don't really want to get too deep in the weeds, but they do care about how the business can be interrupted, how the business will recover, and will the stock price drop or whatever consequences, right? So by bringing them in to these tabletop exercises, and that's why we invite so many executives to this, because it is, ODTN is an awareness tool for the most part. It really helps build knowledge up top and muscle memory at the bottom. I think, we have a sponsor, Immersive Labs, who creates cyber labs and or cyber ranges. And I think that's like a really clever, computer-based training solution. It's like capture the flag, but a little bit more focused on the blue side. I think that's awesome. But what I will preface is I've seen way too many tabletops that are walkthroughs of the incident response plan, and that goes in one ear and out the other. It's snooze fest. I've also seen, where it's just like, all right, well, here's the documents, or maybe here's some computer-based training, and now you're an expert. And like, first and foremost, we write these plans down so that we have a general consensus of what we should be doing. But when an incident actually happens, we are not flipping through pages to identify, like, are we at this step or at that step? Generally, we don't have the time. There's way too much stress going on. The executives are breathing down your neck to get answers. There's way too many stresses to be looking at a granular level. What I do like is creating cheat sheets of your tabletop, your incident response plan. But I've seen 100-page incident response plans. That is not useful day of. It is very useful for building that body knowledge.
Definitely not. And I'll add to this is that I really truly believe, look, at the end of the day, when we go to Ottawa, we go to Calgary, Vancouver, and back to Toronto, we're amplifying, or the CyberX team is amplifying the experience by, the online portal now has a couple of more features. The in-person element has more technicality to it. As the CyberX, now with ODTN News, it adds another element of suspense. I really feel that what we're seeing with ODTN is this idea of cyber attacks. And I think you said this really well. I don't know when, and I've known you now for two more long than I can remember. But I think it was you who said it. Or was it George Alcura? I don't remember. But, in a physical kinetic attack, people see that kaboom moment. They see the explosion. They see the payload and everything else that emerges from it. In cyber, you don't quite see that. And I really feel that by the time we got to module 5, I don't know about you, Alex, but by that time I was like, I don't give a shit now what happens if AV goes down or whatever, because job done. I think people saw that kaboom moment. And there's a lot to unpack in Module 5. And I want to thank you, Alex, for giving me all of these moments in Module 5. But, I want to go to CyberX team. Can you take us to, just in the interest of time, can you take me to the 15th minute, 15 minute and 14 seconds? I just want to watch this part for about a couple of minutes because I feel like there's a question here that we want to dive into. Yeah, around about there. Let's go.
We actually function in security and really follow the CIA triad.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, my team, we are going to take accountability for some of the lapses. We've got good plan. We have rehearsed our plan. We have done drills. We have done tabletop exercises, alongside with our BCP team, incident response, and all the likes. But when the event happened, it is a different story entirely. But I'm happy that, we were able to still recover, which is the most important thing. But we could have done a lot of things better. I know we've got a lot of processes in place. I'm just very concerned about the process we have in place such that a help desk person was able to reset a very privileged account without additional control to really validate that they are who they say they are. To be honest, I don't know if I signed any policy like that. Maybe it was just done, at a lower level, but these are things that we need to take away. We need to kind of revise our process in that regards. And also, I discovered that our mean time, to detect was not good enough. It took us a whole lot of time. Our MTTR, our MTTD was not good. It can be improved. And of
Yeah,
course,
we can pause
I
there
hear the cry
and
of my.
I'll speed it up along a little bit because it was around about this time and I have the quote verbatim. I noted it down. Alex, TJ goes on to say, here's the bigger problem. When the security team brings forward the need for resources, our executive team and the board of directors need to learn from here too. Don't see security team as another insurance that is just eating up resources. We need support. Now, Alex, there's a question here for you. When you, as the security leader, know that you're not getting the business level support, you're not getting the finances that you need, is one of the lessons that you should just leave the role and not stay there? It's a question that just came in.
And you do see that, right? You do see CISOs leave. Even like some of the leadership, I think in CISA left because they were just not getting the traction from the U.S. government. So, first you have to recognize that a CEO or, the executive level, the board level is very much focused on business as usual and business into the future. So the technology thing and, the business interruption is it's interrupting what they like, but it's being caused by something that they don't understand. So there's going to be a level of likely more misunderstanding and lack of awareness, but there could also be an apathy problem. And this is something I wish my younger self knew, but it's something I definitely coach is like, risk, how we understand and manage risk is that risk ownership ascends to the highest levels. And as a leader who isn't getting the traction or resourcing they need from leadership needs to be able to communicate appropriately what the risk is, what the impact is, and what the consequences will be to the business in the language of who is holding the purse strings. And that's something that we suck at generally as cybersecurity and technology people, is that we focus so much on the firewall is going to do this. They don't know what a firewall is. We need to speak to the terms of the e-commerce site doing $1,000 an hour is going to stop. And when you communicate in in that lens to that stakeholder, you're ideally going to get better traction. And lastly, what I'll say is there's this concept of risk acceptance. It's the last thing you do in risk treatment. And up until the CEO, the risk acceptance travels up to them. The buck stops at them. And if we look at more generally speaking at the techie level, like people, techies tend to own too much of the risk, which they shouldn't. They should be providing their knowledge and expertise to give it to their superior who owns the risk of that little corner, who may need to escalate it to their superior who owns a larger piece of the risk. But it really should not be a decision where we're going to make a bad call or under resource something that's going to hurt the business because we were too afraid to tell the CEO, like, this is your decision to make, and this is the consequences.
Yeah, and I think there was also this discussion, like, I think it was coming up a little bit in terms of, like, what decision leadership, how important that is, security leadership, overall business leadership. And though we didn't go into it, I think there's some ethics and legality questions also that have to come up over here. I think this whole situation is also compounded by the fact that, and I remember in 2023 at CISO Forum, this discussion came up. It also came up at the Public Sector Network and a couple of other places, the amount of liability that the CISO takes on. And there could be situations where the liability that you take on has not just effects around losing your job, could have basically liability to the extent of even jail time in some cases. I think the case of Joe Sullivan and everything with SolarWinds, etc. These are important discussions to have. And I think Philip also, from Palo Alto brought up some very critical points. But I want to go to I think it was 23 minutes and 10 seconds. I think this is the second last clip that I want to play. If we can go to that really, really quickly, CyberX team, and just hear out Rob. I think Rob gave out a little bit of an impassioned statement at this moment, and I want to hear it. 23 minutes and 10 seconds. Yeah, round about there is good.
To engage much with other telcos in our jurisdiction or within a federal level. Any perspective you can shed on that?
Thanks for that. It's actually a nice lead into my overall thoughts that I have written down is too often we do these RCAs, we stop at the technical bit. It's the equivalent of doing a plane crash investigation and saying what happened, well, that would be the ground, right? Accurate, but doesn't tell the full story. And so when we think about it, you know, as a chief officer, I've got responsibility for the resilience of my operation, not this guy. That's let you off the hook. But, right, and so that means, you know, do we have a functioning plan if my technology infrastructure dependent goes down to keep essential services? No, because my equipment is dusty and old and nobody how to use it. That's on me. Do I have a plan to reach out to my neighbors? Could I swing all my mobile customers onto Rogers' network while we figure this out so they could get service? We could have done that had we had a plan. Could we reconfigure our edge POSs to swing wireline people into Bell's network? Probably, technically, yes. Did we do that? Did that come up? No. So what it meant was we didn't have a enterprise organizational resilience plan. That's not on IT. That's on the COO. That's on the CEO, who's still off playing golf apparently, because he didn't show up. But that's on the business as a whole. So we've got to get into the place where cybersecurity and cyber resilience is an IT or a CISO problem. It's a COO problem. It's a CFO problem. It's a
let's pause
problem,
over
which
here.
means it's
And I think
the
this
CEO.
this was that moment again where I don't think it was about, hey, everybody shares blame over here, but I think this was that moment where very practically we established the fact that, look, yes, Ali was coming down very hard on Shrey and Alex, but everyone at the table needs to understand we all have a role to play in this whole episode that has happened. But this is the question that I have for you, Alex, is we always talk about security is a team sport. It's a team sport. It's all we have to be. We're all a part of it. We're stronger together. But do we actually practically know what this means? Is there genuinely a proper understanding specifically of how security is also a CFO's priority? We can say it. It sounds good. It's a team sport. We're all in it. But is there a practical understanding of this? I'm going
Great
to say
question.
no.
You know, I've seen lots of structures where like the CISO sits under the CFO.
Mhm.
And that is because, you know, the board understands that that technology risk is a very easy way to lose money. And thus it's under that. You know, whether, you know, like the team sport thing, I think at a tactical level is like, let's make sure that we are playing on the same team. We're not blaming the server guys or the, you know, development girls or whatnot. Like, let's realize that we're all working on the same team. Mistakes do happen on both sides. And under these, we should not be getting at each other on the stressors. But, you know, to Rob's point, like there's a great but somewhat controversial book called The Black Swan.
Yep.
And it talks about that we seldom, like we are cognitively limited to not be able to comprehend the black swan events. And, you know, a telecom being fully taken down is a black swan event. So when, you know, you're doing your threat modeling, your CISO said, you know, brings up, hey, these are the things that keep me up at night. The board and the CEO are going to start looking at their peer that represents the cyber side and be like, all right, maybe he is a little bit more technical than he's letting on. He's maybe not one of us, because, you know, he's talking about something that is almost uncomprehendable until it does happen. And when it does happen, we're entirely unprepared. As Rob was suggesting, is like, the telecom never even considered having a backup plan of if they couldn't deliver service. I do think it's probably more than a overnight change to get any services onto another provider's network. But needless to say, I don't think many telecom providers consider giving their competitor access to their customers.
Yeah, I'll add to what you said. Look, I appreciate that, we've over a period in security and historically, we've talked a lot about it from a very technical function, a team sport, all of these things. But I genuinely believe that just practical steps that a CFO needs to follow, a CMO needs to follow, a CAO needs to follow. I think we have some lackings over there. If it is a team sport, I mean, I watch a lot of cricket. Every role is very, very specific, has a very specific intent and purpose. And I'll say this, that I think that's one area of improvement where whether it's the CFO is focusing in on the spend and focusing in on whether it's the TPRM or the procurement side, what do they need to know, or or whatever checklist they need to have, let's say from a vendor perspective, to check the validity of a vendor, to check if certain things are in place, to validate the spend. I don't know what it is, but I think there are some very practical things that we can get to, and maybe that comes up in the remainder of the season of ODTN. There's quite a lot of interesting moments that you flagged in the closing post-incident activity module. There was one, especially when TJ said something to the effect of, should there be a telecom body, all of them uniting together with their security resources. So you're talking about the Bells, the Rogers, etc., all uniting and providing a singular source of security services for all telcos. That's interesting, but in a competitive landscape, I don't know how that would play out. At the end of the day, I think there's a huge competitive landscape here that needs to be understood, and a monetary reality, which may not make all of those alliances entirely possible. With that said, Alex, it's been close to an hour, and I know that you're busy chopping away at the preparations for ODTN Ottawa. Looks super exciting. Things are coming together really neatly. So I want to thank you for your time, thank the audience, and then just close on a bit of a lighter note where somebody had asked me towards the end of at the end of ODTN Vancouver, and I was walking out. And thank you, siberX team, for bringing up this visual. I think it's popping up on your screens right now. I'll do the less lazy thing and check the stream myself. Yep, I think it's coming up right now on your screen. So somebody asked me and said, Ali, those rings that you're wearing, we thought that those would have supernatural powers to bring our systems back up and make us live as if this never happened. Why didn't you show us the magic of the rings? Well, my friends, there is no such thing as magic. It's only hard work and dedication. And what you're going to see in Ottawa is the product of hard work and dedication from co-chairs like Alex, Jarrett out in Ottawa, the entire advisory crew in Ottawa, from Shruti Mukherjee to Kevin Parent to Lionel to George Alcura to Jeff Nelson to JF Provost, all of them, Amit. They've really put in some hard work and dedication. Super excited to see what happens in Ottawa. Thank you, siberX team, for giving us this opportunity. Very cathartic, very enjoyable to have these chats on a Thursday evening. With that, I wish you a wonderful Thursday evening and a wonderful Friday and weekend ahead. We hope to see you live in person or virtually in Ottawa. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you in the nation's capital in less than a week from now. Good night.